The great hall of the Galactic Concord stretched so high that clouds formed near its ceiling. Commander Lisa Grant stood at its center, feeling very small. Around her, thousands of alien beings watched from floating platforms. Some had scales. Some had feathers. Some were made of light itself. All of them were looking at the human woman who had come to ask for a place among the stars. Lisa had practiced her speech 100 times on the long journey here. Earth needed this alliance. The crops were failing. The oceans were dying. Humanity had finally built ships that could travel between stars, but they had arrived in a galaxy that had been civilized for millions of years. They were children knocking on the door of giants. High Arbiter Velox floated down from his platform. He was 12 feet tall and made of something that looked like living glass. When he moved, his body rang like bells. When he spoke, the whole chamber vibrated. "Humanity," he said, and the word echoed off walls made of materials Lisa could not name. "You have proven yourselves worthy of consideration. Your science is crude but creative. Your art is emotional but honest. Your people are violent but capable of kindness." Lisa kept her face still. She had been warned about this. The Concord did not think highly of humans. They saw Earth as a planet of clever apes who had somehow stumbled into space travel. "We wish to join you," Lisa said. Her voice sounded thin in the vast space. "We wish to trade, to learn, to grow." Velox made a sound that might have been laughter. "And what do you offer in return? Your resources are limited. Your technology is primitive. What value does humanity bring to an alliance that has existed since before your son was born?" Lisa had prepared for this question. "We offer our determination, our creativity, our willingness to work harder than any species in this galaxy." "Pretty words," Velox said. "But we have heard pretty words before. Many young species have come to us with promises. Most have disappointed us." He paused, and his crystalline body pulsed with inner light. "However, we are willing to accept humanity into the Concord. On one condition." Lisa felt hope rise in her chest. "Name it." "You must surrender all projectile weapons. Every gun, every missile, every device that fires objects through force." Velox's voice grew cold. "We have watched your history, Commander Grant. We have seen your wars. We know what you do with such things. The Concord banned kinetic accelerators 12,000 cycles ago. If humanity wishes to join us, you must do the same." The words hit Lisa like a physical blow. Give up their guns? Earth's entire military doctrine was built around firearms. Their ships carried railguns and missile batteries. Their soldiers trained with rifles from the day they enlisted. "High Arbiter," she said carefully, "surely you understand that we need to defend ourselves. The galaxy is vast. There are threats." "There are no threats," Velox interrupted. "The Concord maintains peace through diplomacy and economic cooperation. Violence is the tool of primitives. If you cannot let go of your weapons, then you are not ready to join us." Lisa thought about the starving millions back on Earth. She thought about the children who would never see a green forest or a clean river. She thought about what would happen if she walked away from this chamber without an alliance. "We accept," she said. The chamber erupted in sounds that might have been applause. Velox nodded his great crystalline head. "Then welcome humanity to the Galactic Concord. You will find that peace is far more valuable than any weapon." 1 year later, Lisa stood on a hill in Montana and watched the last gun on Earth being melted down. Millions of firearms had been collected from every nation, every military base, every private home. They were fed into great furnaces that burned hotter than the sun. The metal would be recycled into farming equipment and building materials. Beside her stood Pete Holloway, a man with silver hair and steady hands. He was 63 years old and had spent his life teaching people to shoot arrows. He had trained Olympic champions and hunting guides. He had watched the rise of technology with quiet amusement, knowing that his ancient art would never truly die. "They took our guns," Pete said quietly. Lisa nodded. "They did. But they didn't take everything, did they?" Lisa turned to look at him. Pete was holding a compound bow, a beautiful thing of carbon fiber and steel cables. He raised it, drew back the string, and released an arrow in one smooth motion. It flew 200 yards and struck the center of a target that Lisa could barely see. "The Concorde banned kinetic accelerators," Pete said. "Guns, railguns, anything that uses force to launch a projectile at high speed." He smiled, and there was something ancient in his eyes. "But a bow uses stored energy. Muscle power. It's not a kinetic accelerator. It's a spring." Lisa stared at the bow in his hands. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" "I'm saying that humans have been killing things with bows for 50,000 years, Commander. Long before we had guns. Long before we had metal." Pete drew another arrow and knocked it with practiced ease. "And I'm saying that if the galaxy thinks we're helpless now, they're about to get a very unpleasant surprise." Lisa watched him release another perfect shot. She thought about the aliens who had demanded humanity's disarmament. They were ancient and powerful and wise. They had built an empire that spanned millions of stars. They had forgotten what it meant to struggle, to fight, to survive against impossible odds. But humanity remembered. In the months that followed, something strange began to happen. Archery clubs that had been dying for decades suddenly found themselves overwhelmed with new members. Old men and women who had learned to shoot bows as children began teaching their grandchildren. Hunters who had switched to rifles years ago dug their old bows out of storage and remembered how to use them. The Galactic Concorde watched with mild curiosity. They saw humans playing with sticks and strings and thought nothing of it. After all, what harm could such primitive toys possibly cause? They did not understand that humanity was preparing. They did not understand that the bow was not just a weapon. It was a symbol, a reminder of who humans really were, a promise that no matter what was taken from them, they would find another way. And when the darkness finally came, when the enemies that the Concorde had forgotten about emerged from the void between galaxies, humanity would be ready. Not with guns, with something older, something simpler, something far more dangerous. Pete Holloway released another arrow and smiled. The galaxy had no idea what was coming. The Keth came from the darkness between galaxies, from a place so cold and empty that light itself refused to travel there. They had been exiled 10,000 years ago for crimes so terrible that the Concorde had erased all records of them. Now they had returned, and they were hungry. Lieutenant Commander Danny Shaw was eating breakfast when the first distress signal reached the constellation. He was 31 years old, with dark hair that never stayed flat and a mind that never stopped working. His crew called him Danny. His superiors called him a problem. Both were accurate. The message was broken and desperate. A colony called New Geneva was under attack. Ships had appeared from nowhere, black vessels that seemed to absorb starlight. Creatures were boarding the station. People were dying. "How far are we?" Danny asked his executive officer, Maria Vance. Maria was 5 years older than Danny and twice as practical. She had gray streaks in her brown hair and a scar on her chin from an accident she never talked about. 6 hours at maximum speed. Do it. But when they arrived at New Geneva, there was nothing left to save. The station was dark and cold. Bodies floated in the corridors. Every single person on the colony, all 40,000 of them, was dead. Danny walked through the wreckage in a protective suit, trying not to look at the faces. The Keth had not used weapons that he recognized. They had used claws and teeth and blades that seemed to be grown from their own bodies. They had killed for the joy of killing. "Sir," Maria's voice came through his helmet. "We're getting more distress calls. Proxima Station, Harvest Moon, the Helix Arm Agricultural Worlds." She paused. "They're hitting everything at once." Danny closed his eyes. The Concorde had spent 12,000 years building a peaceful civilization. They had no armies. They had no weapons. They had believed that violence was a thing of the past, a primitive impulse that enlightened beings had evolved beyond. They were wrong. Over the next 3 weeks, Danny watched the Concorde's peace fall apart. The Keth swept through system after system. Concorde peacekeepers, armed with stun batons and restraint fields, died by the thousands. Diplomats tried to negotiate and were eaten alive on broadcast channels. Economic sanctions meant nothing to creatures who wanted blood, not trade. Humanity's small fleet did what it could. But without weapons, they were limited to evacuation and rescue. They saved who they could and ran from battles they could not win. It was not enough. It was never enough. "There has to be something we can do," Danny said one night, staring at the tactical display in his quarters. Red markers covered half the sector. Each one represented a conquered world, a destroyed station. Millions of dead. Maria sat across from him, her face tired and hollow. "We surrendered our guns. The Concorde made us promise. And even if we hadn't, we don't have time to build new ones." Danny nodded slowly. She was right. Manufacturing firearms would take months, maybe years. The Keth would conquer the entire galaxy before humanity could fire a single shot. His eyes drifted to a corner of the display. Cargo manifest. The constellation was carrying supplies to the outer colonies. Sporting goods. Recreational equipment. Games and toys for people who would never receive them now. "Maria," he said slowly, "what's in our cargo bay?" She pulled up the list. Food supplies. Medical equipment. Entertainment systems. Sports gear for the colony games. Archery equipment. Swimming. Stop. Danny sat up straight. "Archery equipment?" Maria frowned. "Yes. Compound bows, recurve bows, arrows, targets. Standard recreational supplies." Why? Danny's mind was racing. He remembered something from his childhood. His grandfather had been a hunter, one of the old kind who used bows instead of rifles. He had told Danny stories about what those bows could do, about the power stored in those bent limbs and stretched strings. The Concorde banned kinetic accelerators, Danny said. Guns, railguns, weapons that use force to launch projectiles. Yes, and? A bow doesn't use force. It uses stored energy. Muscle power converted into speed. Danny stood up, his heart pounding. A bow isn't a kinetic accelerator. It's not banned. Maria stared at him. You want to fight the Keth with bows and arrows? I want to fight the Keth with anything we have. Danny was already moving toward the door. Find me everyone on this ship who has ever touched a bow. Hunters, hobbyists, anyone who competed in archery as a kid. I want them in the cargo bay in 1 hour. They found 17 people. 17 men and women who knew how to shoot. Some were rusty. Some were scared. All of them understood what Danny was asking. The Keth armor is designed to stop energy weapons, Danny explained, holding up a compound bow. Blades, stunners, force fields. But it's not designed to stop this. He pulled an arrow from a quiver. The tip was standard competition grade, sharp but not deadly. Danny walked to the ship's machine shop and came back with something different. The arrow now had a tip made of tungsten carbide, the hardest material they had on board. In zero gravity, Danny said, this arrow will travel forever. No air resistance. No gravity to pull it down. Just pure speed, straight and true. He looked at his 17 volunteers. They were not soldiers. They were engineers and doctors and cargo handlers. But they were human. And humans had been killing with bows since before they learned to write. "The Cath think we're helpless," Danny said. "Let's prove them wrong." 3 days later, they reached Relay Station Kappa 7. 42 Cath warriors had taken control of the facility, holding 300 civilians hostage. The Concord had declared the situation hopeless and begun drafting surrender terms. Danny Shaw and his 17 archers walked through an airlock with bows in their hands. The Cath saw them coming. They laughed or made sounds that might have been laughter. They saw primitive beings with sticks and strings, walking toward warriors who had conquered 1,000 worlds. They stopped laughing when the first arrow punched through a warrior's chest plate. They stopped laughing when the second arrow took another through the eye. They stopped laughing when they realized that their armor, designed to resist energy and force, could not stop a sharpened piece of metal traveling at 300 feet per second. The battle lasted 11 minutes. When it was over, all 42 Cath were dead. Not a single hostage was harmed. Not a single human was scratched. Danny Shaw stood among the bodies and looked at the bow in his hands. It was simple. It was ancient. And it had just changed the course of galactic history. The message was sent across every channel humanity controlled. 4 words that would echo through the stars. We found a way. The news of Kappa 7 spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. 17 humans with bows had done what 10,000 Concord peacekeepers could not. They had killed the enemy. They had saved lives. They had proven that the Cath could bleed. On Earth, the response was immediate and overwhelming. Every archery range, every hunting club, every sports store that sold bows was flooded with people wanting to learn. Old champions who had retired decades ago found themselves teaching classes of hundreds. Young people who had never held a weapon in their lives practiced until their fingers bled. Pete Holloway stood in a military briefing room and looked at the faces watching him. Generals and admirals, the leaders of what remained of Earth's defense forces. They had spent years feeling useless, stripped of the weapons that had defined military power for centuries. Now they were looking at a 63-year-old archery coach like he was their last hope. "I can train them," Pete said simply. "Give me anyone willing to learn, and I'll make them dangerous." General Catherine Price leaned forward. She was a tall woman with iron gray hair and eyes that had seen too much death. "How long?" "Basic competency, 3 months. Combat readiness, 6 months. Experts who can shoot in zero gravity while dodging enemy fire." Pete shrugged. "That depends on the person. Some people have a gift. Others never get there." "We don't have 6 months," another officer said. "The Cath are advancing. They'll reach the core worlds in weeks. Then we train faster." Pete picked up a compound bow from the table. "This isn't a rifle. You can't just point and shoot. Archery requires strength, coordination, patience, and practice. But humans have been doing it for 50,000 years. It's in our blood, in our bones." He drew the string back to his cheek, holding it steady despite his age. "The galaxy forgot what we are. Time to remind them." The 1st Archer Division was formed within a week. They called themselves the Bowmen, and they came from every corner of Earth. Hunters from the mountains of Montana. Competition shooters from Korea and Japan. Traditional archers from Turkey and Mongolia, whose ancestors had conquered empires from horseback with nothing but bows. They were men and women, young and old, united by a single purpose. Amy Torres was one of the first volunteers. She was 24 years old and had grown up hunting deer in rural Virginia. Her father had taught her to shoot when she was 6. Her grandmother had taught her father. The bow had been in her family for generations. Why are you here? The recruiting officer asked her. Amy thought about the videos she had seen. The Keth tearing through stations. The bodies floating in space. The screams that cut off too quickly. Because someone has to stop them, she said. And because I never miss. Training was brutal. The bowmen learned to shoot in normal gravity and zero gravity. They learned to shoot while wearing spacesuits that limited their movement. They learned to shoot while floating through corridors, while jumping between ships, while the world exploded around them. They also learned to modify their weapons. Engineers worked day and night to improve the ancient design. They created arrows with miniature thrusters that could change direction in flight. They developed broadheads tipped with compressed plasma that exploded on impact. They built compound bows with draw weights that would have been impossible for normal humans. Powered by mechanical assistance, built into the spacesuits. But the most important lesson was the simplest. Breathe. Aim. Release. Trust the arrow to find its target. The Keth are bigger than us, Pete told his students. Stronger. Faster. They've conquered worlds and killed millions. But they've never fought anything like you. He pointed at the target range, where Amy Torres was putting arrow after arrow into a space the size of a coin. They've never fought humans who remembered how to hunt. The first major deployment came 2 months later. A Keth fleet had trapped a Concorde convoy carrying 3 million refugees. The alien ships surrounded the helpless vessels like wolves around sheep. Surrender or die, they demanded. Those were the only options. Then the bowmen arrived. 200 archers launched from a single carrier ship. They wore suits designed for combat, sleek and black, with bow mounts built into the arms and quivers that held 100 arrows each. They flew through space on small thrusters, moving between the ships like ghosts. The Keth did not understand what they were seeing. These tiny figures, these fragile humans floating in the void. They laughed and opened fire with energy weapons that should have cut the bowmen to pieces. But the bowmen were not where the Keth expected them to be. They moved in patterns that seemed random, but were carefully planned. They used the debris field as cover. They approached from angles that the Keth sensors could not track, and then the arrows began to fly in space. There was no air resistance. An arrow released at 300 feet per second kept that speed forever, flying straight and true until it hit something. The Keth had never designed armor to stop such attacks. Why would they? Nobody used such primitive weapons anymore. Nobody except humans. Amy Torres killed her first Keth warrior that day. He was 8 feet tall and covered in scales that could stop a knife blade. She put an arrow through his eye from 200 yards away. He was dead before he knew she was there. She killed 4 more before the battle ended. The Keth fleet, confused and terrified by enemies they could not understand, retreated into deep space. The convoy was saved. 3 million lives preserved by 200 archers with sticks and strings. When Amy returned to the carrier, her hands were shaking. Not from fear, not from exhaustion, from something else entirely. How do you feel? Another bowman asked her. Amy looked at the bow in her hands. It was the same one her father had given her when she was 12. She had killed deer with it. She had won competitions with it. Now she had used it to save millions of lives. I feel, she said slowly, like this is what I was born to do. Across the fleet, similar scenes played out. Humans who had been taught all their lives that violence was wrong, that weapons were evil, that peace was the only answer. They had believed it because they had no choice. The Concorde had taken their guns and told them to be civilized. Now they remembered what their ancestors had known. Sometimes peace is not an option. Sometimes you have to fight. And when you have to fight, you fight with everything you have. The bowmen were just the beginning. Soon there would be thousands. Then tens of thousands. An army of archers that would sweep across the galaxy and show the Keth. what humanity was truly capable of. The hunting had begun. The war against the Keth lasted 3 years. 3 years of blood and fire and arrows flying through the dark between stars. 3 years of humanity proving that they had never truly been tamed. Danny Shaw, now a captain, commanded the flagship longbow from its bridge. The ship had been redesigned from the ground up for the bowman's needs. Its hull bristled with siege bows, massive weapons that could fire arrows the size of telephone poles at speeds that would make a railgun jealous. Its hangars held hundreds of combat archers ready to deploy at a moment's notice. "Contact," his sensor officer called out. Keth War Group, 12 ships, bearing 27 Mark IV. Danny studied the tactical display. The Keth had learned to fear human archers, but they had not learned to run. Pride would not let them. They were warriors who had conquered galaxies. They could not accept defeat at the hands of primitives with sticks. "All ships, combat formation," Danny ordered. "Archers, prepare to launch." In the hangar bay, Amy Torres checked her equipment one final time. Her bow was a work of art now, upgraded with targeting systems and stabilizers that would have amazed her ancestors. Her arrows were tipped with warheads that could punch through starship armor. Her suit was a second skin that made her faster and stronger than any natural human. But under all the technology, the core remained the same. A bent piece of material. A stretched string. The stored energy of human muscles. The ancient art of the hunt. "Torres," her squad leader said through the comm. "You're on point. Lead us in." Amy smiled behind her helmet. "Always." The battle began as all their battles began. The Keth opened fire with energy weapons that turned space into a light show. The bowmen scattered, their small forms impossible to track among the debris and radiation. Then, when they were close enough, they drew their bows. Amy found her first target, a Keth officer standing on the bridge of an enemy cruiser. The ship's windows were designed to stop micrometeorites, not arrows. She released, and the shaft punched through the glass like it was paper. The Keth fell. The bridge crew panicked. One arrow. One kill. It was what she did best. Around her, hundreds of bowmen did the same. They targeted engines and weapon systems. They killed officers and gunners. They turned the Keth War Group into chaos with nothing but carbon fiber and sharp metal. The siege bows fired. Longbow and its sister ships launched projectiles that tore through enemy hulls. One Keth cruiser exploded in a ball of fire. Then another. Then another. Within an hour, the battle was over. All 12 enemy ships were destroyed. The bowmen lost 3 archers. It was their best victory yet, but Amy knew the real battle was still coming. The Keth had been gathering their forces at a place called the Obsidian Rift, a massive tear in space where reality itself seemed to bleed. Intelligence reports said they were preparing for a final push, a massive invasion that would sweep through the Concord's remaining territories and end the war once and for all. "If they break through," Catherine Price said in a strategy meeting, "there's nothing between them and the core worlds. 100 billion people, gone." Danny studied the maps. The Keth fleet numbered 10,000 ships. Humanity had 200. Even with their arrows and their courage, the math was impossible. "We can't win a straight fight," Maria Vance admitted. "We need another approach." Amy Torres, now a sergeant and the most decorated soldier in human history, spoke up from the corner of the room. "Then we don't fight straight." Everyone turned to look at her. Amy had changed over 3 years of war. She was harder now, her eyes carrying the weight of everyone she had killed. But she had not lost her ability to think clearly. "The Keth are predators," she said. "They hunt weak prey. They surround. They overwhelm. They don't know how to fight someone who hunts back." She stood and walked to the tactical display. "We've been defending, reacting, letting them choose when and where to fight. What if we stopped doing that? What are you suggesting? Catherine asked. I'm suggesting we become the predators. We hit them at the rift before they're ready. We don't wait for them to come to us. We go to them. Amy's voice was cold and steady. We hunt them in their own territory. We make them afraid of the dark. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Danny Shaw began to smile. I like it, he said. I like it a lot. The assault on the Obsidian Rift began 3 weeks later. 2,000 bowmen, the largest force ever assembled, launched into the Keth staging area like arrows from a giant bow. They did not attack in formation. They did not announce their presence. They simply appeared and started killing. Amy led the first wave. She flew through the Keth fleet like a ghost, her arrows finding targets with mechanical precision. Officers, engineers, communication specialists, anyone who kept the enemy organized. The Keth response was confusion. They fired their weapons at shadows. They shot at their own ships. They sent warriors to hunt the hunters, but the bowmen were never where they expected. This is what we do, Amy whispered as she released another arrow. This is what we've always done. Then the main fleet arrived. Longbow led 200 human ships into the chaos, their siege bows singing. The Keth, already panicking from the archer assault, could not organize a defense. Their formations broke. Their command structure collapsed. Their mighty armada became a collection of individual ships, each fighting alone. Danny Shaw stood on his bridge and watched the tactical display turn from red to green. He thought about the Concorde's demands 3 years ago. Surrender your guns. Become civilized. Be peaceful. Knock, he said quietly. The siege bow operators drew their weapons. Draw. Targeting systems locked onto the Keth command ship. A massive vessel the size of a small moon. Loose. A dozen projectiles, each one 50 feet long and tipped with compressed plasma, streaked across space. They struck the command ship in perfect unison. The explosion was visible from 3 systems away. The Keth fleet shattered. Some ships fled into deep space. Some surrendered. Some fought to the death and found it quickly. By the time the sun set over Earth, the battle was over. Humanity had won. Amy Torres floated among the wreckage, her quiver empty, her arms aching. She had killed more enemies today than she could count. She should have felt tired. She should have felt horrified. Instead, she felt at peace. This was what humans were. Not the peaceful, civilized beings the Concorde had wanted them to become. Not the helpless victims the Keth had expected. They were hunters, survivors, the descendants of ancestors who had faced down mammoths and saber-toothed tigers with nothing but sharp sticks. The galaxy had tried to change them. The galaxy had failed, and now the galaxy would learn to respect them. The surrender came 6 months after the Battle of the Obsidian Rift. The Keth, broken and defeated, had nowhere left to run. Their fleets were destroyed. Their leaders were dead or captured. The species that had once terrorized entire galaxies now knelt before the beings they had called primitives. The ceremony took place on a neutral station, a massive structure that floated between stars and belonged to no one. Thousands of representatives from across the Concorde gathered to witness history. The Keth War Master, a massive creature covered in scars and shame, walked forward with his head bowed. General Catherine Price waited for him. She was 62 years old now, her hair completely gray, her face lined with the weight of 3 years of war. In her hand she held a bow that had belonged to her grandfather, a simple wooden thing that looked almost fragile compared to the high-tech weapons the bowman now used. The War Master stopped before her and sank to his knees. His voice was deep and broken when he spoke. Humanity, he said. We surrender. We beg for mercy. Catherine looked at the creature that had ordered the deaths of billions. She thought about the colonies that had been destroyed, the families that had been torn apart. the screams that still echoed in the dreams of survivors. "You will leave," she said. Her voice was calm and clear. "You will return to the void between galaxies. You will never threaten this space again. And you will remember." The War Master raised his head, confusion in his alien eyes. "Remember what?" Catherine smiled. It was not a warm smile. "Remember what happens when you awaken the hunters." The Keth left that same day. Their remaining ships gathered at the edge of known space and vanished into the darkness from which they had come. No one knew if they would ever return. No one particularly cared. If they did, humanity would be waiting. High Arbiter Velox requested a private meeting with Catherine after the ceremony. They met in a small room overlooking the stars, just the two of them. The crystalline being seemed smaller than Catherine remembered, his light dimmer, his voice softer. "We were wrong," Velox said. "We looked at humanity and saw violence, chaos, a species that needed to be controlled." Catherine said nothing. She waited. "We took your weapons and believed we had civilized you. We thought that without guns, you would become peaceful, harmless." Velox made a sound that might have been a sigh. "We did not understand that the weapon was never the danger. The weapon was only a tool. And now?" Catherine asked. Velox was silent for a long moment. "Now we understand. The danger was never your guns. The danger was you." He turned to face her, his crystalline body reflecting her image back at her. 12,000 years ago, we banned kinetic accelerators because we feared their power. We thought that by removing weapons, we could remove violence. We were fools. "You built a peaceful civilization," Catherine said. "That's not nothing. We built a civilization that could not protect itself. We relied on diplomacy and economic pressure, and hoped that the darkness would never return." Velox's voice grew heavy with regret. "When the Keth came, we had nothing. Our peacekeepers died in minutes. Our diplomats were ignored. Our sanctions meant nothing to creatures who wanted only blood." Catherine nodded slowly. She understood what he was saying. The Concord had forgotten that peace is not the natural state of the universe. Peace has to be defended. Sometimes, that defense requires violence. "What happens now?" she asked. Velox straightened, and for a moment, some of his old authority returned. "The Council of Seven has made a decision. Humanity will serve as the protectors of the Concord. When threats arise that cannot be solved through negotiation, the bowmen will answer." Catherine raised an eyebrow. "You want us to be your warriors. We want you to be what you have always been. Hunters, guardians, the shield that stands between civilization and the darkness." Velox paused. "We should have recognized it from the beginning. Humanity was never meant to be tamed. You were meant to protect." On Earth, the news was received with complicated emotions. Pride in what the bowmen had accomplished. Grief for all those who had died. Uncertainty about what the future would hold. Pete Holloway watched the announcement from his home in Montana. He was 80 years old now, his hands finally too unsteady to draw a bow. But he had trained thousands of archers over the past 3 years. He had helped save the galaxy with sticks and strings. Beside him sat Amy Torres, taking a rare break from her duties as the commander of the 1st Archer Division. She had more kills than any soldier in human history. She had medals that filled an entire wall. But when she visited Pete, she was just a student again, listening to an old man tell stories about proper form and breathing techniques. "You did good, kid," Pete said, watching the broadcast. Amy smiled. "We all did good." "No." Pete shook his head. "The galaxy did what it always does. It tried to make us something we're not. Peaceful, civilized, harmless." He looked at her with eyes that had seen 80 years of human struggle. "But you remembered who we really are." Amy thought about everything that had happened. The fear when the Keth first appeared. The hope when Danny Shaw won the first victory. The determination as the bowmen grew from a handful of volunteers to an army of thousands. The moment when she realized that the galaxy's most advanced civilizations were helpless, and humanity had to save them with weapons their ancestors would have recognized. "We're hunters," she said softly. "Yes," Pete agreed. "But more than that. We're survivors. 50,000 years of ice ages and famines and wars. Every challenge the universe threw at us, we found a way to overcome. They took our guns, and we picked up bows. They tried to make us weak, and we became stronger." He picked up his old bow, the one he could no longer draw, and held it out to Amy. "This belongs to you now," he said. "Not because you're the best archer I ever trained. Because you understand what it means." Amy took the bow. It was simple wood and string, nothing like the advanced weapons she used in combat. But it felt right in her hands. It felt like history. "What does it mean?" she asked. Pete smiled, and there was something fierce in his old eyes. "It means we never give up. It means we always find a way. It means that no matter what the galaxy throws at us, we will adapt. We will overcome. We will survive." He leaned back in his chair and looked out at the Montana sky. The same sky his ancestors had looked at when they first learned to hunt. The same sky that humanity had finally conquered. "They thought they could change us," Pete said. "They thought they could make us something else. But they were wrong." Amy stood and walked to the window. Somewhere out there, among the stars, the bowmen were patrolling, protecting, hunting anything that threatened the peace they had won with blood and arrows. "We are what we have always been," she said. Pete nodded. "Hunters," they said together. "Now and forever." And across the galaxy, in every corner of known space, the creatures of the darkness learned a new lesson. The Concord had protectors now. Beings who would never surrender, never give up, never stop fighting. Beings with bows. Beings who would shatter the galaxy itself before they let the darkness win. The story of humanity was far from over. But one chapter had ended, and a new one had begun. The chapter of the hunters. The chapter of the bowmen. The chapter that would echo through eternity. And it all started with a simple truth. You can take away the guns. You can ban the weapons. You can strip humanity of every tool of violence they have ever built. But you cannot take away what they are. You cannot take away the hunt.